Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. We'd like to thank Capital One, our sponsor for the podcast from OSCON in Austin, Texas. Learn more about Capital One's developer program at developer.capitalone.com. Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack, here at OSCON in Austin to talk about InnerSource. And joining me are Margaret Mayer at Capital One. Hey, Margaret.
Hello.
And Kranthi Dandamudi.
Good morning.
Also Capital One. Good morning. And I know that the two of you actually discussed InnerSource in a talk here at OSCON. Can you tell me what that was about? What was the topic and what was the discussion you had?
Yeah. So several years ago, Capital One built an internal application framework, and we realized the power of that was its ability to be used across the company, and not only to be built by one team, but also to put contributions in from all teams, because everyone's going to have a slightly unique need or a new feature that they want. And so for us, this is how InnerSourcing started at Capital One. So we told a little bit of the story of our practices and principles and the cultural values that you need, that we thought made it successful at Capital One, as well as an overview of where we are with the project today, which is still live and very thriving under Kranthi.
So Kranthi, where is the project today?
So the project is widely used at Capital One. It started off as a grassroots fringe action, and then turned into an enterprise-wide asset today. So we build applications and APIs with the project. It's called Chassis. It's an ecosystem that facilitates application frameworks and tools to support continuous delivery.
So it's an application framework.
That's correct.
Right. And so tell us about this application framework.
The framework essentially provides a set of horizontal crosscuts that several applications and APIs across the organization can leverage. For example, there's needs at Capital One to collect business events for legal defensibility. There's functionality needs around making payments or balance transfers. There's needs around skinning and theming your applications. So these are some of the crosscuts that the framework actually extends for general use.
Okay. And so tell us about then the role, how you develop this InnerSource culture to develop this application framework itself.
Yeah, so I mean, that was one of the hardest things. So in our talk, we talked about, one, you start with a team of people, and what we started with was a team that actually was under one leader versus starting distributed. And because it was the first, it seemed to make sense. Then we really focused on what was going to be the MVP going to market. And we found a first partner in our card division who was going to use it first. And so that really created a partnership across the enterprise division and the card division that allowed us to then not only have them use it, but also then begin InnerSource contribution back. Because they would suggest features to the roadmap, their team would contribute, and then it just sort of grassroots, as Kranthi said, spread throughout the organization, because we had that first customer. And one of the things I said in the talk yesterday is you've got to think about, when you're starting your InnerSource project, you've got to think like a startup. So even though I've been a long-time Capital One person, I've worked with a lot of startups. And when I'm one of their early customers, I get the gold standard treatment. Right? They want to make sure that I'm a successful, happy customer. It's the same with InnerSource. That first contribution in that first use case outside your division, you just want to really provide great service to them, so that they spread the word, right? That's how those things thrive and survive.
So you really want to provide great service to them, So that had to be part of like the that has to be kind of an underlying theme in all this, is providing that service. So Kranthi, how do you provide that service?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So several ways, right? So obviously, lining up a core team that moderates the project, assembling the needs. Number two, assembling developers that can fulfill those needs alongside the core team, right? Driving transparency to what we do as an organization is key, right? Ensuring that everybody gets a seat at the table to drive backlogs and roadmaps. Ensuring that people are rewarded for their contributions, right? Whether you turn them into a moderator or you leverage their contributions to help make decisions or influence product direction.
Okay, so how did you guys come up with those? How did you guys come up with those major themes that you just listed there?
Yeah, wow. That is always the how did you do that? A part of it is we used a lot of our own values at Capital One that I think are core to it. So that was part of it. But also, I think in order to think about going external, we looked at the open decision framework out there. We did a lot of conversation with the potential customers, right? As we talked about this idea, and we said, what are the practices you want to see to make this successful? So, we talked to the potential consumers of our framework internally and said, okay, if everyone believes conceptually that this is a good idea, then what does it need to take to thrive? And so it was really that feedback process, and it was really a collaborative effort to come up with these, what turned out to be our principles and practices.
So then you had to start the hard work, right?
Yes.
And the hard work of developing that framework, right?
Right.
And is this where you started building more of like an API lifecycle management process internally, or was that a separate project that you were building?
That was a separate project.
That's a separate project.
Yeah.
Right. So Margaret assembled the core team, so we started work on the project. And then, to Margaret's point, we started talking to a number of lines of businesses and the high-value customers, right, to assemble MVP, and then source development talent from across those lines of businesses to start constructing and extending the framework to meet the needs of the general public.
Okay. So the general public then were the consumers of the application framework, right?
Right. Internal developers.
And so
In the beginning.
Right,
In the beginning, they were consumers. And then, opening up our communication channels, ensuring that everybody has a vote, started making those consumers into makers as well, right? That's the key part.
to makers as well. So what does that mean?
So they start producing software alongside us, right? So we produced software, they consumed it in their applications. We started giving them a seat at the table. We started, providing increased visibility to what we're doing. So they started coming in and contributing into the framework. So they become makers of that software alongside us. And then we attribute rewards to their contributions that will help them further their contributions.
So there's thousands of engineers inside Capital One, and as the community, tell us about the community now. I mean,
That's a good question. So when I was brought in, that was about 6 years ago, I had a team of 7 people, right? There was no external contribution. So over the past year, two, obviously the framework took several shapes. They were predecessors, right? And the predecessors employed a lot of vendor-first mentality. So we were using vendor product. So it was decisions that the core team made. But as we progressed, we came to learn that to retain and recruit talent, right, even in the form of contributions or talent that we're bringing into the organization, it was important for us to invest in picking the right technologies, number one, right, and the right skills that the developers can use to fulfill the needs using those technologies, right? And then today, if you look at that, we have over 150 contributors to the framework. What started as 7 people, strictly core team driven, today we have over 150 external contributors to the ecosystem.
so where do you take it from here? Like, what is where do you want to go with this then?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are several different ways. One is it will continue to evolve. New features will be added. I think whether it tends to be, whether it goes to be open source, we're not sure. We have other projects under different leaders at Capital One that have been open sourced. But I don't know, Kranthi, what's your vision these days?
So the vision here is at least we believe that chassis, which is the framework, has created a framework for people to increase cooperation, co-creation, right? Drive creative reuse and innovation, and also extending these principles to other horizontal work in the organization. So it's just not chassis today. There's several other horizontal products that the organization can benefit from, are leveraging these principles, and you see external contributions coming into those products as well. Chassis as an ecosystem is a culmination of several tools, several features. There are subsets of functions, for example, driving a disruption to understand the resiliency posture of your application. That's a feature that's substantial enough so that we could potentially open source that. There's features to orchestrate containers for your microservices that could be open source. So there's lots of pieces, like secret management is a huge gap in several organizations today. So some of these features can be externalized, and we have the potential to actually open source that over the next year or so.
So how do you prioritize that? What does that look like?
Ooh. So I think that is where there's a core team of folks, and with that roadmap, they're making decisions across all those products. Now, the decision to prioritize open sourcing it really becomes is there enough of a use case externally for us? And that's what the team is looking at, because we recognize that not only now are we taking care of the needs of the internal community, which is pretty large, but also the external community, and we want to make sure that there's enough engineering support for that external open source component.
Yeah, spot on,
Yeah.
Margaret. We want to make sure that it bakes within Capital One first, this broader usage is at Capital One, then go in and surveying the industry to see if that gap exists, and then applying that to the community.
And then just do that on a continual basis,
That's it.
right?
Right.
That's it.
Right.
That's it.
And then, so I'm curious on the questions you get. Like, were there questions in the discussion you had the other day, or was it, sometimes people don't ask many questions, but I'm sure you get questions overall too.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people, and a lot of the questions become, we've tried to get started, but we can't just get off the ground, right? And a lot of that to me, and you asked that question too, and paused because I don't think there's one simple answer to it, but finding that first peer group, right? First peer engineering leader who's willing to consume your framework and contribute to it. That's the start.
And then treat them like a
treat them like you own a product, right? You own a tech product, and it's an internal. I call it internal sales almost.
Right.
And then if you also have an enterprise architecture function at your company, if your company's large enough that you do, I think they can be advocates as well for adoption of that framework. And so getting the architecture on board, depending on different companies have different ways that they handle their architecture, that can be an advocacy group as well for adoption of the framework, because starting with adoption then leads to contribution back. I think it's an easier model to get people to see the benefit of it.
It's a one-by-one thing, isn't it, at the start?
It is,
really
it is.
Yeah.
And to add to what Margaret said, rewards for meritocracy is key,
Yes.
right?
Oh, yes.
It's absolutely key on top of what Margaret said. You're including people, you're co-making decisions, but rewarding contributions, right? Bringing them into the moderator group so that they can evangelize and steward the product. And then obviously baking that into the performance management process is a natural extension to equip them with more autonomy and leadership.
So are those rewards, autonomy and leadership?
Right.
So where do you guys take this from here? Where you guys, you're almost at the beginning of this, but you're also pioneers in this world, right? Because there's not many large companies that are doing this yet, but still you're very young in the process.
Yeah.
And where do you want, what is it that you kind of aspire for these projects in the longer term? Is it more just thinking about it iteratively and thinking about it in a very kind of a short-term kind of a way, or is it, or is there a longer kind of a roadmap and plan that you really want to develop?
Yeah, you want to speak
sure.
to Chassis first?
We want to continue to broaden these principles across anything and everything we do. Obviously, not every project is sourceable. There are certain things that you need to protect, right? But we want to broaden this principle or these principles so that we can apply those to projects that are vertical or projects that are horizontal. Because even in CARD is so large, they might have some work that they can actually go and inner source across a number of divisions in division, and then start producing intent that we can publish it into the industry. For example, we have a number of products: Custodian, Hygeia, Hydrograph, right? So we're trying to apply those principles, to products that we actually publish into the industry. Have external contributors come in and feel like it's their product, right? They're part of the consortium. And they can continue to grow so that others in the industry can benefit as well.
So that's a common theme I'm hearing, that I'd love to hear your perspective. A common theme I'm hearing is like, get them involved, get them to participate, reward them, make them feel like help them understand that they're peers now.
True.
Right.
And that will then continue itself, because then they'll adopt those principles and they'll be recruiting people too.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think, especially for a framework or even a product like Cloud Custodian, right? If a team has no problem in our company of pulling things down, from other open source projects, right? External open source projects. So really, because we have that culture already around open source, as we think about inner source, it really shouldn't be that big of a deal.
Right.
And so that was also part of our culture shift as well, just around our software, around open source in general, so that helped. So I think if companies are challenged with inner source, I wonder whether or not they are actively, using open source and leveraging open source right now, and if they aren't, that might be part of the culture switch. The other benefit that we talk to people about all the time is, why invent the wheel? I mean, developers want to do something unique, right? They don't want to have to reinvent audit logging every time.
Right.
Or just, reinvent, like, oh my gosh, I have to think about all the different cache settings and what caching tool to use, right? If they can just say, oh, this is what is there, and it's been used, tried and true in other applications, let me just pull that down and use that. That way I can focus on the business features that matter to our external customers and get to market faster, I think. Because we're focused on those new features as opposed to reinventing the same thing.
Right. So that becomes an incentive, because that's a business driver.
Right, exactly.
Right. So those business drivers that do play a big role in this, obviously. Yeah. And I think that's kind of, sometimes it gets overlooked. I was having a conversation yesterday with some people about, and they were asking, like, what are the business drivers behind open source communities and why they form? And I'm like, that's a great question. Because like you see lots and lots of open source communities, but are there business drivers behind them, and what role do business drivers play?
Yeah, I think you get to market faster. You also get better software.
Because you have community wisdom.
Well, you have all these eyes on it, right?
Yeah.
Because not only is other teams using it, they're also looking at the code and contributing back for it. So you can't do inner source as a black box.
Right.
So if a company, a team of developers is like, hey, come use my product, but I'm not going to let you look at the code, that's not inner source. So I don't know, I don't know what other companies are trying to do as they're trying to adopt it, but you've got to be willing to have your peers look at the code, and peer-reviewed code is always going to be a ton stronger.
But how do you manage the politics then? Because every organization has those politics.
Yeah.
It's a difficult question to answer. The key is, right, obviously, there's that feeling that people will lose control or ownership, right? So somehow finding methods to remove that fear. And one of the things that we've tried at Capital One was that, giving them a seat as a moderator. For example, we look at the value of contributions over time and the business value it produces, giving them a seat as part of the moderator group. So, and then that moderator will go and start evangelizing this across his organization. So that'll slowly start to lessen some of these politics that play. And rewards process too is just, like I said, I continue to say this, it's key, it's very important, right? Chassis, if you look at as an ecosystem, there's a number of products within, in some cases, over 90% of the contributions come from the community, right? This is because we've spent some time sitting down with them, right? Helping them understand the importance of co-creation. And then that can lead to, as an avenue, to lessen some of the politics that occur.
Because everyone wants their feature. Or,
Everybody wants
And everybody wants it today, right?
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of contribution, because you can go back to that team and say, you know what, we would love to have that feature. Can you bring the developers to the table to build it and put it in the product? And then all of a sudden, they're invested and bought in. And, the other thing is there's always like 3 groups of technology adoption, right? Early adopters, fast followers, and kind of late to market. And all 3 have value when you're talking about internal projects. You find, of course, the early adopter to be your first partner. But you want all the different stakeholders, regardless of where they are going to sit, because you actually don't know right at that moment who's going to fall into what category, and have them pull together your roadmap, even if they're not using it immediately. Having awareness, yes, it's extra voices at the table, but we find that the fact that they're there and that transparency keeps them informed, because at some point they might say, oh, wait a minute, I have this problem now I really need to solve. Why don't I use that?
Yeah.
Even though 6 months ago they weren't ready to be there. I mean, and that's fine. You don't need everybody ready at once. You just need to get started. You just need that one partner.
Any last thoughts on,
just one thing I wanted to add. You can't change something that you can't measure. So what was key was finding methods to assemble, and evaluate our software processes, our inner source communities, and providing the community access to the data was very helpful for us. We've built tools on top of GitHub to give us that visibility, right? And also going and advertising successes was key. So developers say, yep, I'm at home, I'm valued, my contributions will be valued, and they go and bring another developer in. So that has helped quite a bit. Closing thoughts from my side is be patient, right? Make sure that you drive inclusion. Make sure that there is solid leadership support, right? Make sure that we continue to create methods to drive reuse and contributions.
Any last thoughts?
No, I think Kranthi said it well.
Great. Well, thank you both for taking some time to talk with us today about InnerSource at Capital One, and good luck with with it going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
We'd like to thank Capital One, our sponsor for the podcast from OSCON in Austin, Texas. Learn more about Capital One's developer program at developer.capitalone.com. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Bakers at thenewstack.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.